Welcome to Disruptor Confessions. I'm your host, John Ayers. Our guest is a literature professor who reads technology the way you and I might read a novel. She says we've gotten very good at building things and not very good at what they're actually for. Dr. Deb Donig came up through English literature and human rights, not technology, not coding. She teaches now at UC Berkeley School of Information, co-founded the Cal Poly Ethical Technology Initiative. She hosts Technically Human podcast about what technology is doing to us, not just for us. Now, her book is called The Technological Grotesque, and the argument underneath it is that modern societies have lost that institutional muscle to ask whether the things we're actually building are good for us as human beings. Those responsible AI groups, the governance task force that we put in place, those functions that are supposed to actually answer those questions, they keep kind of reproducing the very problem they were supposed to solve. And that's where we want to start. That's the conversation I want to have with Deb Donig.
Hi, John. It's so nice to be here. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Well, fantastic. So first off, this literature background, but like technology, it seems like this is exactly the intersection we're at in mid 2026. And I was thinking about you and I thought, gosh, when I'll start here, Deb, when you are at a dinner party and someone says, what do you do for a living? Do you just say I'm a professor and leave it at that? Or do you go past that?
Well, it depends whether I feel like they could use some punishment, because it's a very dangerous thing to ask an academic what they do. I'm only kidding. I try to talk about what my research does and how it might intersect with the things that they know and experience every day. And one of, I think, the tension points and one of the benefits and also one of the challenges of working at the intersection of ethics and tech and human rights is that more and more and more these systems, technological systems, intervene into our social, physical, material reality in every single context of our, going about our business. Our behavior is conditioned by technologies. Our behavior and interactions with other people are mediated through technologies. Our ability to navigate the world, perceive the world, all comes through our technological
So do you get into this like at dinners? Do you get into it, or does it depend on who you're chatting with?
When I'm asked, this is what I get into. I do other things in my life too. I am a human being. I love hiking with my dog. I like going to the gym. I spend a lot of time with my family. But when I'm asked what I do, I try and connect it to the experiences that people have every single day. And we can get into what those are. But I try to make sure that folks can connect what I'm doing to who they are. After all, a dinner party conversation is a conversation, right? And I want to know as much about how these technologies are affecting them as I know about what these technologies are doing. That's how I learn, right? That's how I
One of
know
the things one of the things I find interesting about you is this kind of storytelling English literature background. You read a lot. You actually look at like science fiction and some of the stories that we've seen in our past, often like our precursors to what we find in our lives. Something that I think you've identified, and we'll talk more about it, but I wanted to kind of sit a little bit with this in that the word value of what we're building and creating efficiencies, it seems like optimization and efficiencies have completely surpassed the value. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I talk about this sometimes when I talk to my undergraduates, and when I talk to them, I talk to them about a substance that many of them are familiar with. You're probably familiar with too, John. It's called Soylent. And Soylent is a nutritional delivery system that an engineer came up with, leveraging, of course, the very famous 1970s movie called Soylent Green, in order to create a nutritional delivery system that would supplement for a meal, because meals are tedious and time expensive in order to create. So this engineer created this product, Soylent, so he didn't have to get up from his work, so he could be essentially more efficient at what he was doing. And I think that's great. I think efficiency is an important value. Soylent fills a important niche in the market. But we do a lot of things in our life, including eating, for other reasons than efficiency. So when I talk to my students about this, I say, well, why do you eat? Do you eat because you want an efficient nutritional delivery system only? And they say, no. One of them talks about how she loves the fresh strawberries from the farmer's market. And another one talks about how he misses the meals that his mom prepared when he was at home, and he makes those meals for his roommates so that they can experience what his culture is like from his family. And I talk about how my grandmother used to make these matzo balls, and my mom prepares those matzo balls exactly the same way that my grandmother did it, which is why that if you go to my family home, you get matzo balls that have the kind of consistency and density that one would only have found in my particular family lineage, and that this became a way for my family to materially recreate countries that they had to flee from. So we eat for so many reasons other than efficiency, for love, for the desire to have something that tastes good, to prepare a loving meal for our friends, for our families, for our lovers. Uh, we do these things for love and for passion and for creativity. And I think that efficiency is an important value. I want our technologies to allow us to leverage that value, but I think that we need to think more robustly about all of the values that we want our technologies to serve. And just one last paragraph, I conclude this when I talk to my students by asking them how many of them have a romantic partner. And some of them raise their hand and say yes. And I say, well, if you don't have a romantic partner, how many of you eventually want a romantic partner? And the rest of them raise their hands and say, well, how many of you want your romantic partner to love you efficiently? And they all sort of giggle because they're imagining what it would feel like to be loved efficiently. Um, and they, of course, don't want to be loved efficiently, because love is a value that we acknowledge requires us to give up the principle of efficiency. We lose our productivity elsewhere to bestow love on the people that we care about. Um, and again, efficiency, important value, but what if we built technologies to maximize for love or for depth or for connection rather than primarily for efficiency? And we've been told primarily, I think, that technologies are good because they're making X, Y, or Z more efficient. And I want us to be able to think beyond that.
Okay, so you just struck a nerve. Like, I want you to share a story you told me. I was going to talk about this later in the show, but you had a conversation. This is, I think, in 2019, if I recall, with a student, and it basically kind of opened your mind to something. Can you share a little bit about what this student told you what they needed to know and what they already had learned in high school?
Yeah, you bet. This was the very first week on my job as a new professor hired at Cal Poly, and I had been invited to a faculty student meet and greet where our job was to come and to interact with students who would be coming into it and potentially taking our classes. And I'd been seated with a group of engineers, engineering students, maybe first, second year students, and they asked me who I was and what I did, and I told them that I taught English literature. And John, I have a history and backup even before I got into academia in startups, and I'd thought a lot about human rights in my dissertation. And already when I got to Cal Poly, which is a polytechnic university where a number of people are technical and where the kind of slant of the university is toward technical majors, I had already been thinking about what it would be like to blend technical and kind of liberal arts or humanistic education. And I had it in my mind that I might teach a class on human rights and ethics in tech. And I told the student that, and he looked at me and he said, with the confidence that only an 18-year-old undergraduate can have, that he would never take such a class because he learned everything he needed to know about ethics in high school, and that human rights was just basically intuitive ethics. And I let that sit for quite some time because I took it very seriously. I don't tell the story to castigate the student. The student was reproducing a identity and a sentiment that he had been taught, I think, very deeply, that this assumption that ethics and technical ethical understandings and technical understandings were two different domains, and one belonged to one group of people and the other belonged to another group of people who probably weren't in high school, was something that he had deeply, I think, embedded in his self understanding. It's something that I think is very common, the idea that these two things are completely different, and that one, having expertise in one, need not have an understanding or expertise in the other. And that was the, I think, mythology that I wanted to start to pull at, and I wanted to start to build something different. I wanted to create something so that, 4 or 5 years from that time, 2019, people graduating with a degree in STEM could not say that ethics was just something that other people did in high school. And I think that we've gotten to that point. And I will also say, importantly, that we've gotten to a point where people can't just say that technical prowess and technical knowledge is somebody else's domain and they don't have to have anything to do with it. The problems that we're facing, the technologies we're building are too big and they're too complicated and they're too interdisciplinary and they touch on too many areas of our life to simply be the domain of one area of expertise. And that's really where my story begins.
I love it. Do you want to tell an abbreviated story about how this student and you circled back at some point?
Well, I actually, John, I don't know what happened to that particular student. I assume that he got his degree from Cal Poly and he is now working in the workforce. And I think that probably in 2026, the workforce that he has gone into is fundamentally different from the workforce that might have been embedded in his assumption in 2019. But a couple of months ago, close to a year ago now, I gave my first kind of public talk on my book, which I had just finished the initial manuscript for. And at that talk, which I gave in a pub, you can ask me why I like to go give talks in bars, but that is one of my favorite things to do. You get a huge kind of swath of the population out there. I had a lot of people who were coming up and asking me questions, and I could see that there were people that I wasn't quite going to be able to get to. And I said, well, if they want, they can email me or get in touch. And I gave out my email address. And a couple of days later, I get a message from a student. And he says, Professor Donig, you may not remember me, but I was a student at Cal Poly. And I was at that dinner because I told the story of that dinner at this talk. And I was at that dinner. I was one of those engineering students. So he's in the workforce now. He's a technologist. He works in Silicon Valley. And his work requires him to take ethics seriously because that is the environment that we are now in 2026. And for me, it was a nice kind of full circle moment where, because my research is longitudinal, because my research really does take that long kind of picture view and try to measure what happened between 2029 and 2026, 2019 and 2026.
Right. Right.
It was really amazing to have that kind of personal circle back.
Deb, your book, The Technological Grotesque, what did you intend to write? And then what did you ultimately write about? And the reason I asked, you run your own podcast and you took a break, kind of a hiatus, and really focused on writing. And I want to kind of poke at that a little bit. What was your intention when you first set out to write the book? And then what did you ultimately land on?
Yeah, when I started to write the book, it had been a culmination of 5 or 6 years of research and National Science Foundation grant to do a longitudinal study of the workforce in ethics, responsible, and public interest technology, and to try and understand both quantitatively and qualitatively what had happened to that profession and what had happened to the idea of ethics in tech over that time. And the study had some prominence. It was a National Science Foundation study. And given that prominence and that platform and the magnitude of what I was trying to accomplish, I said to myself, I want to write the kind of New York Times best-selling book on this topic. This has to be the defining book on this topic. And I tried to write that book for a year, and I couldn't write that book. And the reason I couldn't write that book is probably familiar to a lot of disruptors on in your listener base who are trying to do something really big. And when you build up something really big in your mind, it becomes impossible to accomplish it sometimes because the idea is so big. And what it would take you in terms of resources to build that prominent, extraordinary thing is so massive that it's intimidating. You say, I can't even start. I don't even know how to start this. And I didn't even know how to start writing the best book on the subject, the New York Times bestseller. And after a while of not doing my podcast and thinking and missing it, truly, I realized I actually wanted to do something a little bit different. What I actually wanted to do, I realized, was to start a conversation about a topic that I wanted other people to understand with me. I wanted to be able to talk to other people about that topic. I wanted to give a framework and vocabulary to other people so that we could have that dialogue. And over the course of that year, I wrote the book sort of like I was trying to have a conversation with people. I took conversations that I had had with people, I wove them together. I spent time talking into my phone, translating voice to text in all sorts of hilarious ways. If you look at what happens when you translate voice to text sometimes, with all sorts of gaffes. And then trying to have a conversation with the audience, imagining who I might be talking to and all the different stakeholders and people who I wanted to be in that conversation and how I wanted to constellate that conversation. And that was how I was able to finally write that book.
So one of the things that I find interesting too, that you've kind of landed in this space that is so critically important right now. There's a lot of messaging in the middle of 2026 around ethics, governance, responsible AI, philosophy required within the leading AI companies. There's just a lot of question because the pace of the development, these recursive self-learning models that these frontier models are building are just moving at such a rapid pace. But I wanted to ask you, like, I got super involved, Deb, around like the green movement, with climate change, and super interested in what greenwashing was labeled years ago. And now I wanted to ask you about AI washing, I'll call it. So maybe the question is AI ethics just theater? Is that where we're at? How do you see that right now?
It's a good question. I would pause on the word just because I think the word just intends to minimize the work of, whatever comes after it in the sentence. So I don't think that it's just ethics washing or just kind of good PR for a company, but it can and it should be that as well. And it frequently is. If you look at the job title and you find that the job title is, developing policy and compliance for X tech company so that X tech company can better market itself and tell its story about how it's actually compliant in certain ways that we kind of know that that company is not. That certainly coheres with the narrative of ethics washing in the industry. But I think that, again, to go beyond and to challenge that word just, there's a lot else there. And to dig into this a little bit, I would have to tell you a lot more about the scope of this kind of work, which exists inside of tech companies, but also exists in places like the ACLU, which is trying to understand the intersection between kind of civic and civil rights and tech, or people who are working to genuinely reflect the will of the people and build better policy in the context of tech. And there are good people, by the way, in jobs that might be considered ethics washing jobs who are really trying to do a good job within the constraints. And that's really where the center of gravity is. It's within the constraints of what the job actually allows, and how you can leverage constraints within what a job allows in your kind of bounded agency within that context to ultimately meet good ends, even if the job isn't fully set up that way. And now I have a lot of sympathy for people working in these companies. I, by the way, have a lot of sympathy for companies too. Some people, particularly places like Berkeley, would object to the idea of capitalism, broadly speaking, and object to the idea of companies building technologies that intervene into our social environments in order for that company to make money. I don't have a problem with companies making money. I think that companies are set up to make money and that actually profit incentives can be a huge driver of innovation. I'm not saying anything new to people who listen to this podcast who presumably understand what it means to be a disruptor, right? But when you permit that a company is allowed to make money, then you also understand that the incentive structures to make money oftentimes override or lead the business toward an incentive structure that can override ethical impulses and perhaps even ethical needs. So in that structure, what I try and tell people who are going to take these jobs, because I think that the point here is not to fundamentally change capitalism. That is not my task. I'm not that kind of revolutionary thinker, but to rather give people the information that they need to know in order to, if they take these jobs, succeed in them and actually accomplish whatever good they can. And so I think what you need to know in order to succeed in these jobs is that you're working in a constrained incentive structure where you have to align your argument for making a ethical case or taking an ethical choice in the life cycle development of a product toward a ends that aligns business incentives, that is to say proceeds, with an ethical incentive. And there's a very strong case for that in many instances, by the way, that people can make. But like anything else, it's to identify that and to tell that story and to make that case. So you have to be able to make the case about that alignment.
Deb, I want to ask you if you know, if you can maybe break this down a little bit further even. I'm starting to mash together a lot of words, and I think maybe I'm part of the problem because I do that, but like ethics, responsible AI, governance, there's like public interest around technology, trust, governance, safety. Do you break those apart? Are they all the same? How do you see that? And I guess I'm asking in the context of like frontier models, leading tech companies. What have you seen? What are you observing? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, thanks, John. I really appreciate this question because part of the book is actually making a case for how we consider this job market or this work of ethical, responsible public interest technology to begin with. And there's a lot of terms, right? You probably heard not just ethical technology, responsible technology, public interest technology, but things like human-centered technology or things like humane design technology, right? So all of these things are kind of verbiage. It gets very confusing. So I'll just kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about the category to begin with. Teaching data science, I really like talking about categories because when I teach data science, I start off by saying that that basic verb of data science, which is to count, means two things at the same time. It means, on the one hand, to measure something, that is to say, to quantify it in some way. It also means to matter. We say that something counts when we say it has value. So to count is both to measure and to matter. And when I bring this up, I bring it up because in this instance, we want to think before we say, okay, here are the titles that matter, or here's a verbiage that we're going to delineate. We talk, I think, first about what this category is. And so the larger category of this work I like to talk about is work that does one of three things. One, asks normative questions about what we should build, what we ought to build. The second, asks questions about when we build this thing, how do we technically create these structures in order to maximize good and minimize harm or risk? And the third is, what kind of civic properties or civil regulation structures do we need to think about and bring into the conversation when we talk about tech? What kinds of new civil properties do we need to invent? And what existing civil properties do we already have? And because of that, and because of historical reasons associated with those three terms, ethical technology, responsible technology, and public interest technology, I delineate those things. They have three separate functions, three separate kind of skill sets that go into them, and oftentimes they belong in three separate parts of the organization. Public interest technology, I talk about as the people who are working on the regulatory, the compliance, and the civil rights dimensions of technology. So, for example, if you are a fellow at the ACLU and you are looking at how technological products are compliant with civil rights, or if you are a legislative aide and you're trying to think about which policies you want to advocate for in order to make the environment safer or better within our technological ecosystem, you're a public interest technologist. And you probably have a degree in public policy or a JD, degree in law. If you are a responsible technologist, you are working on, for example, model bias to see what data training or what properties of a particular large language model lead to systemic harms or systemic bias. Or you're looking at, for example, red teaming to ensure that a large language model or a generative AI platform can't be hacked or used by bad actors in certain ways. So that's a responsible technologist, and you probably have a degree, either bachelor's or advanced, in some sort of technical domain, such as computer science. If you are an ethical technologist, you're asking those normative questions about what could or should be built in a certain domain. And you probably have an advanced degree in some dimension of humanistic inquiry, and you're probably blending it with other dimensions of thinking in order to make yourself a candidate who might be viable for hire. Again, three different domains. three separate, should we say, salary tracks, three different sets of education. The kind of sadness in this is that these three different domains very infrequently talk to one another. They're trained in very different ways. They frequently speak different vocabularies. They sit in different parts of an organizational structure, and they're not really trained educationally or within the organization or industry context to speak to one another. And that is where a lot of the problems emerge.
Well, and I think this is why I love the fact you come at it from words matter to someone like you. The very specific language, the naming matters. I have a good colleague of mine who literally has the title of ethical AI lead. We had Dr. Rahman Chaudhary on our show about red teaming and looking at the LLMs. So I'm very familiar with that. These three buckets that you look at, are those common in the industry? Are they kind of agreed upon?
No, that is kind of one of the innovations of the book. And the reason that I felt it was important to give that breakdown is that one of the groups that I am trying to talk to, well, two, um, are the category of people looking for jobs and also people who are hiring for jobs. And for people who are looking for jobs, it can be really hard to come at certain skills and say, I know I want to work on, human values in tech, but I don't know what jobs are available to me and I don't know how I fit into these things. More importantly than that, I think it is really salient for people who are interested in this profession and are now getting their education or certifications to know what kinds of work they're training themselves to go into, what the profession looks like, and what accumulation of skills or degrees they might need to get in order to make the impact that they want in this kind of work. And as I said, the salary and the structure of organization and the work can be quite different. And of the people that I hope read my book, um, one group is the next generation of thinkers and the people who are training them. And so my book, I hope, speaks to that next generation of people who I think are more and more inclined, unlike the engineers I met in 2019, to want to do work of substance that makes them be able to use their technological skills and also make a kind of social impact. I think that that's one of the bets that I'm making on the next generation. And I want them to know which skills they need to aggregate in order to get these jobs. And I want to also help educators create new educational structures, the ones that weren't available when came to Cal Poly in 2019, to be able to fill that role. Because the problems that I identify in industry don't start in industry. That fragmentation that I've mentioned, the one where the people don't talk to each other, it's an industry problem, but it's also an educational problem where we train people to do one thing, specialize in history or philosophy or computer science, oftentimes with a neglect for other domains. And I think more and more in our 21st century, it's insufficient to be trained in simply one domain, and that all of us need to have that kind of cross-functional expertise to be able to. Sometimes I use the word of bilingualism, language of bilingualism, to talk to people who speak different professional languages than us in order to cooperate and collaborate in important ways to create technological products that are also humanistic products.
I don't think there's a lot of argument that we need governance, structure, guidance, public interest thinking and ethics, responsible AI, all the things that you're sharing. I don't think there's an argument that we don't need that. I think everybody agrees upon that. But Demis Hassabis, the day we're recording this, Demis Hassabis just released a blog post about this from Google DeepMind. He has a belief of a certain kind of approach to this, public-private potential collaboration. Dario Amodei has talked about this. Others have talked about it. What's preventing us from kind of collaborating on this? Is it governmental entities that need to do this? Is it the private sector? Like, what are you trying to message? How do you see this moving forward?
I talk less about causality because I think that there's very infrequently in any phenomenon worth examining one single contributor, but I talk about contributing factors. So there's a couple of contributing factors among many that I would want to highlight. And of course, there are more than I would be able to share in this. So I'm just going to pick two. to really focus on. And one of them, as I mentioned, are the educational structures, a kind of fragmentation of knowledge and structuring that starts, I think, educationally and proceeds and continues and ossifies in terms of organizational structures and industry. But I would also challenge the premise that everybody agrees that we need regulation or we need policy. There are some really good thinkers, and I'm always encouraged to see those kinds of thinkers be at the helms of companies. People like Dario Amodei, I'm just thrilled, and maybe he'll do something terrible and I'll have egg on my face. But right now, at least, he's at least professing himself and his company to want to advance ethical standards and also to intervene into a market and create a benchmark in that market for what an ethical, responsible company actually does and how they adhere to certain principles. And that's really important because it sets the tone. So I'm really glad for that. But I think that there are some very powerful players out there who would disagree with the idea that we need more policy or we need more regulation. I don't want to name names on this podcast. I don't know who's listening to your podcast. I don't know who may pull out advertising right on your podcast. But there are very importantly figures primarily in industry who would want to push back against most or any regulation. And those figures have a lot of money. They do a lot of powerful lobbying, and they also have a kind of magic card that they pull out and play every single time this conversation comes up. And that magic card is, if we don't do it first, China will. Right? So that's the magic card that they play. And it's a powerful magic card because, at least in our geopolitical environment right now, people are very concerned about a relationship with China that we thought was maybe a slight rivalry that actually seems as though it's being positioned to be geopolitically adversarial in a competition for global dominance. The argument that they pull out goes something like this. If we create regulation and if we allow our regulators and our regulatory environment to slow down our production of innovation and innovative products, then China will do it first. I think that that argument certainly carries some weight in the context of thinking about a technological arms race, because we are, I think, in an adversarial relationship with China. However, one might play that card with the assumption, shall I say, that people in the United States are not themselves familiar with the regulatory environment in China, which actually is quite significant and which is, I think, much more advanced in many ways than our regulatory environment. So that argument doesn't account for the reality of how China is actually proceeding with regulation. The second thing that I would want to do in order to challenge that is to argue that one of the distinguishing features about the United States and rationales for wanting the United States to develop the technology first is the belief in the United States as powerfully grounded in a human rights discourse, such that our regulations are embedded in and emergent from properties related to human rights. And so if we ignore our human rights principles in order to create products that outpace China's production, then I'm not sure that we're really creating anything that is meaningfully attached to the thing that we're trying to preserve, which isn't just American power, but American values. The third and important feature that I think we should keep in mind when we think about the argument that we need to create technologies in a way that will outpace the technologies that China will create in this kind of adversarial technological relationship is the dimension of what we ultimately do when we create these technologies that add value to our society. So, for example, a lot of the technologies that people are championing in order to compete with China are military technologies or technologies that will enable the United States to either be militaristically able to go on the offense or to be able to defend itself. And if those technologies are not developed safely, many people, most notably Helen Toner, who has worked on this issue and is an expert in this domain, has observed that research shows that ultimately the lack of safety and the consequences of that end up becoming that technology doing something harmful to the United States itself. So I'll give you an example so I make that a little bit less abstract. If you create a technology that is, an autonomous lethal weapon system, and you don't really think about how you're going to make that safe because you're trying to create it in a way that outpaces China's development, the most likely outcome of that lethal autonomous weapon system, if it goes wrong, is not that it sets off some autonomous warfare in China. It's that it turns against the
Mm,
people who created it, right? That it becomes potently adversarial against the people who developed it. And so, if we create these technologies, ignoring the regulatory and safety cautions against them in the haste to outpace China, we could very likely find ourselves harmed by those things. And I bring up this example because I think it's the most catastrophic risk. But think about all of the small catastrophes or risks that can emerge when we create a technology for use in our society, and we don't think about that technology going wrong simply because we're trying to outpace China. Think about the most likely outcome, which is not that China will build it first, but that we'll build something that will ultimately end up harming ourselves.
Deb, I want to follow up on that. One of the things that I think is interesting, and I'd like to get your take on it, is you even said you're not anti-capitalism or anti-market, and companies need to make money, but it seems that there isn't a push towards human flourishing, that it's more just about efficiency and just profit for profit's sake, and this kind of race that we're in. How do we pivot that? How do we make human flourishing, and as you kind of talk about doing good for humanity, how do we make that the focus? Is that something that can be done?
It absolutely can be done. Absolutely can be done. There are really three prongs to this. And the one is robust policy to promote healthy competition and to enable emerging markets to be able to develop safely, robustly, and along kind of principled guidelines. The second is the emergence of markets themselves and the support by investors in markets that may have a harder time getting off the ground, but that actually end up developing. And the third prong is really civil society. People who are doing fantastic work in this dimension, like John Ayers, have proposed the idea of a human reclamation project, a kind of civil society uh, based understanding or knowledge about what these technologies are and how they actually operate and how they're impacting us, to get people to the point where they demand with their dollars and with their votes that technology companies are doing better. And John, I'll give you one example of where I'm really excited about this, because you ask, can a technology benefit human beings and also be safe in our regulatory environment? And of course, we know that they can, right? Sometimes technologists say alarmingly that, or they raise the alarm rather, that if we have regulations getting in the way, these life saving, massive transformational technologies won't get off the ground. We'll just make it too difficult for this to happen. Well, John, we actually have transformational life saving technologies within the structure of a very robust, safe system. And we call them vaccines. We have this. Vaccines have to go through massive amounts of testing before they're able to be injected into members of the population. This is for a life saving technology, a literal life saving technology. And so, if vaccines have to go through that technological review, which we have erected an entire, right, kind of like department of our government around, why ought not AI that develops better pictures, right, or better animation, also have to go through that regulatory process? And one area that I'm very excited about is lab grown meat, clean animal products that replicate meat that are grown in a lab, that try and intervene into some of the worst planetary crises and ethical crises of our time. And this technology is going to make the world assuredly better. If I say if, but I really do mean when it gets off the ground, it's going to have a huge environmental impact, and it's going to, I think, quite be transformative in terms of how we think of our food systems, and therefore the ability of human beings around the world to flourish in terms of protein and nutrient intake, as well as the limitations of us being exposed to dangerous bacteria, antibiotic resistance, and the kind of total destruction of our planet in terms of grazing lands and in terms of the lands that are put to use in order to feed livestock. So I really believe in this technology, and I see this technology getting off the ground. I see government support for it. I see private market support for it, and I also see increasing public support for it. So I know that this is possible. I know it's possible, but it takes the levers of intervening into the market, creating education in the public, and then finally developing the technologies themselves and the political and policy regulatory infrastructure for them in order to do that.
Thank you for bringing up that specific example. We talk about disruption on this show a lot. A lot of times people equate disruption with a negative. Disruption can be really positive. It can be solving, curing cancer. It can be solving world hunger. It can create a lot of good. Disruption isn't always negative. I fall in the line of I'm cautiously optimistic. I know that's probably right on the fence, but I'm very bullish, very optimistic. But I have caution, right? I have caution about the risks, as I'm sure others do. But one of the things that I'm often reminded by people who push back and who have more fear and more concern about the risk, they often will say, we didn't ask for this. We didn't ask for this exponential growth and change of AI, this disruption at this pace and scale appearingly is going to have on our lives, on our jobs, on our workforce. One, and I'll bring this to you because you have something that I love. Before we can build anything, you say we have to first imagine it. So I want to kind of go back to that. But Deb, who's telling the stories now? Who's leading the narrative now that we have to go down this path? Who are the leaders of telling the story of where we're headed?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I would say that none of these stories are new, right? When I talk about the mythologies undergirding technological production in particular, one has to do with this place that you and I are in, the state of California. And the state of California, long before the Silicon Valley age, has been a place where people came in order to make their fortune, and a place where people came with the promise that not only would they make their fortune, but they could remake themselves. This is a long history story, as old at least as the first stories of the American West. So you think about the first stories of the American West, people come to the state of California, and where do they come? San Francisco. And what do they find in San Francisco? Gold, right? It's the gold rush. And so you have people panning for gold and kind of destroying the environment for gold, erecting new cities for gold, building new technologies to get the gold out, spending a lot of time and labor and reinventing civilization on the West Coast. And by the way, committing horrific violence to the people who happened to be there in the first place, who also didn't ask for this, right, in order to make that kind of fortune. So this is a very old story. And this story has certain protagonists attached to it. One of them is the lone cowboy, the cowboy who rides in with this idea of a vigilante justice kind of performance where he is going to be the hero. He skirts the law, is an outside of the law, and goes and, kind of rearranges the society. Well, there's a direct line between that lone cowboy who wants to move fast and break things and Mark Zuckerberg, the way that we portray somebody like Steve Jobs. It's a direct lineage. It's a very old story.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think the fact that you kind of lean into stories and bringing it into our modern era the way you do, these stories are very relevant. They're incredibly relevant to where we sit today. Before we wrap, I want to go through some tactical takeaways. You are a professor. You're working with a lot of students in that younger demographic. A lot of them are, I think we saw this past year during graduation ceremonies, some people were booing when anybody mentioned AI or technology. I want to just touch a little bit on what you're observing as a professor at Berkeley. You've been around students. What are you observing from the younger generation? And maybe this is something you can offer. How does a 22-year-old now who's maybe finishing their degree, how do they build tools and skills that are what I would call durable? How do you see that? If we have these stories being told and we're moving down a certain path, we've talked about these responsible governance needs. What do you tell someone who's 21, 22 years old?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And what I'm seeing, first of all, to answer the first part of your question, is a lot of disillusionment. This generation of college going 18 to 22-year-olds are people who often have been brought up um, with the idea that they can change the world and that is their task. And they've also simultaneously been brought up with a lot of disillusionment. This is the generation that was brought up with the knowledge that we could potentially be in a climate crisis. This is the generation that was also brought up in the context of a government that seems fairly ineffective in uh, reproducing the will of the people in any meaningful way. So it's a paradox that they have inherited. On the one hand, that their work should be meaningful, that it shouldn't be just a job, that they should be trying to save the world. And on the other hand, that they're powerless, that there's no agency, and that nothing really ever important ever changes. I think that that's a tough paradox to be in. The third thing that I should mention is that often they are also dealing with an unfathomable fear of them graduating and not having a job. And that's a realistic fear because we are told every day by the very people who are building technologies that these technologies are going to make it impossible for anybody to get a job. I can't think of another technology where the people who are building it and then broadcasting all of the ways in which the technology that they're building is going to cause harm, right? More frequently sometimes than they do broadcast the good that that technology will do. Then they say, somebody pressed the pause button on this as though they weren't the person with the pause button. That's an aside. But I think that for our students, what I try and teach them, two basic things. The first thing is that what I have been saying over and over again, the kind of thesis of my book in a certain light, and one of the messages that I hope to leave folks who are disrupting in your audience with is that the big problems that we are facing and that we will continue to face are too big for any single domain or area of expertise to solve. I'll give you one example. COVID, right? Probably one of the formative moments in my students' lifetime was certainly a medical problem. It was solved when we started to get vaccine in a certain dimension, but it was also a political messaging problem. It was a psychology problem. It was a problem of economics. It was a problem of what story we thought that we were in that particular moment and where we as a society wanted that story to ultimately go or end. And so this problem is too complex for any specific domain of knowledge to solve it. So if you really want to solve tough problems in the 21st century moving forward, I think you have to be able to translate across domains. We have to think bigger in our educational systems for this next generation than saying we're going to graduate somebody with 4 years of understanding how history works, or we're going to graduate somebody with 4 years of understanding how computer science works, or 4 years of understanding how psychology works. You have to be able to tie your technological understanding to the history of ideas, to the psychology of behavior, to an understanding of who human beings are and how we got that understanding of ourselves through things like stories. So I think that cross-domain expertise and being able to talk to people through that translation capacity, that bilingualism is really important. Trilingualism, quadrilingualism is really important. The second thing that I tell my students is that optimism is not a choice. It is, in a certain level, a demand, and an ethical one at that. Because it's really easy to be pessimistic. It's really easy to despair. If you're despairing, all you have to do is throw up your hands and wail about it and say, we need to despair. Here are all the problems. A lot of people take that point of view. I take the point of view that if you are identifying problems, you have to also identify potential solutions to those problems. And if you're identifying solutions to those problems, that is an optimism. That is saying that there is a solution to these problems, that you are going to work toward that solution to that problem. And it's much harder than pessimism because it actually requires something of you. It requires that kind of work, and that work is hard. But for things to get better, you have to be optimistic. And I can't see any point in trying to understand a problem or to engage in that problem if you're not on a certain level also trying to find solutions to that problem. And so I think my work demands of me that I'm an optimist. And I'm optimistic about this next generation. I'm optimistic about what these technologies themselves can do to make things better because I think that they can, right? I gave the example of clean meat. I think that's true across the sector for all sorts of things that are getting built. I think that we can make the world better. And I want to see the willpower, the muscle power, and the institutional structures available in order to facilitate those solutions now that we have recognized the problem.
Are your students receptive to your messaging? Are they open to that? Do they nod in agreement?
I think so, because I also think that my experience is that there are not a lot of people, certainly in the humanities, who are giving that message, and then there's a lot of pessimism. I don't mean to speak badly about my colleagues, but having come out of the humanities and now teaching in a different domain, I've recognized how much of academia is that pointing out the problems. And it's important to point out the problems. Critics are there to point out problems, right? That is a first important impulse and task of finding solutions. But that's where we should start. That's not where we should end. So I'll give you an example that makes this, for me, very concrete. A couple of years ago, I went to one of these kind of conferences where we were there to talk about the problems. And I met a woman named Dr. LaTanya Sweeney at that conference. And Dr. LaTanya Sweeney is the head of the computer science department at Harvard. But she took a couple of years of leave from that position under the Obama administration to work at the FTC. And during that time, she was there in a moment where she was seeing an increasing amount of problem, concern, and actual harm caused by credit card fraud and abuse. And she noticed this and she pointed out the problem. And the problem wasn't severe enough yet for people to really pay attention to. So there were a couple of people complaining about it, but nobody was really willing to pay attention to the people complaining. And they told her, go do other stuff. There was other stuff that's more important. They weren't really ready to recognize the problem. But as I think will happen with our current AI moment, the problems increased. And what LaTanya Sweeney understood, and this is critically important, is that if you sit and complain about something, nobody's going to listen to those complaints after a certain amount of time. And the harm actually had to happen first for people to really pay attention. But she also knew that if she sat there and complained and let the harm happen and hadn't come up with a solution by the time the harm happened, then the harm would happen and the moment would pass and the harm would continue to grow without any solution in place. And so she spent years ringing the bell, but also creating a solution to the problem. And John, if you or your audience pull out your wallet right now and look at your credit card, what you will see is a chip on that credit card. That's LaTanya Sweeney's chip. That is the solution that she spent time developing during the time where she first initially started complaining about the problem and a point where people were willing to do something about the problem.
Love it. Love
And
the
I think
story.
this is I think the parable that I like to tell people, because what I want to be able to do is to say, here's the problem. I realize that I can't solve it right now, but optimism says that there's going to be a point in time where people are going to be willing to listen to the solution. And that might be a point in time where a lot of harm has already happened, but there will be that point in time. And I better be ready with that solution so that I can say to them, here's your chip. Now, here's the last paragraph of kind of thought before I end this parable. LaTanya Sweeney's chip is a technological solution to this problem. It is absolutely a technological product that she created. But think about all of the ways in which LaTanya Sweeney had to think about that solution in the context of the social, behavioral, cultural, infrastructural dimensions that people participated in and that solution needed to accommodate. So she had to have a kind of robust sense of how people actually behave, how credit cards work technologically, but also how people use them. What kinds of infrastructure you could build given the way that people spend money and the way that people store the capacity to spend money on their body or in their wallet. And all of these things had to come together to create that solution. And I don't know when the harm will come, but I know it's coming. That's the pessimist side of me. The optimist says, let's work on the solution and let's do it collectively.
Well, I love it. I thank you for that, because we started with the younger generation, but I like where we landed. I want to ask you a couple other audiences who might not be in that younger demo, but I think it plays off what you were just sharing, especially the chip from Ms. Sweeney. That's fantastic. If someone's a leader at a corporation and they are trying to embed more ethical AI, responsible AI, governance, foundational and functions within the organization, what's the one question they have to ask or answer themselves to make sure that it just doesn't become theater, that it is truly embedded in how they work? How would you respond to a leader if they asked you that?
It's a good question. And people do ask me that question. Sometimes they phrase it slightly differently. They say, hey, I'm working in this company and I'm really disillusioned about it. What should I do? And I feel like I should quit and just participating in ethics theater, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I say, I wish that I had a bucket solution, a one size fits all solution. But the truth is, I don't know your life, right? If you have a family and that family depends on your healthcare and you're getting your healthcare through your employer and you live in the United States, so there isn't a kind of socialized medical system, I can't tell you to quit your job tomorrow and start something on your own, because you have to consider the position that you're in. If you've got a chronic disease, right, you can't lose that healthcare. Or if your wife has a chronic disease, your partner, your child. So I can't tell people that they have boundless agency to do whatever they want. I talk to people in terms of bounded agency, a term that sometimes comes out of rational decision making theory. And what I take from that term is a kind of a term I call bounded ethicality, meaning given your station, the position that you're in, what can you do to make a difference, acknowledging that you can't make any decision sometimes that you just want to whimsically or even thoughtfully because you're constrained by certain positions, sometimes inside of your institution, sometimes inside of your position in that institution, sometimes as in terms of who you are as a person. And people aren't political projects. So I would never tell somebody to give up their life in service of a political project when they have other things on the line for themselves. What I do think anybody in a leadership position can and must do is to think more broadly than the smaller questions about what are we required to do by law or compliance. So much of this work has become work of what can we do within the constraints of the law, which basically becomes how can we either maximize our profit margins without getting ourselves into the position of paying out a lawsuit that's going to be more expensive than any proceeds we would get from taking this particular action. Ask Meta, who has been taken to court twice and had to pay out that particular question, most recently in trials in New Mexico and in California. But think about the broader questions that you're never going to get asked by your compliance team or your legal team. And that question comes down sometimes to, should we build this? Should we not build this thing? So that is a different question than can we build this thing in terms of the regulatory environment that we're in? But ought we to build this? What does a world look like where this product exists? What does a world look like where this product exists well? What does a world look like where things go wrong when we create this thing? And we actually do have a structure for thinking about these things. Sometimes in kind of novelty, new terms, it's called a foresight methodology. I just call it science fiction. Because in the specific domain of technological innovation, science fiction has been the bastion of thought experiments that put a new technology that is supposed to further a certain ends or ambition or value that human beings have into our society and let it play out to see what consequences might ensue. So go watch Black Mirror and see what a well-intended novel technology can do in terms of the harms that it might cause. And this has been a way of thinking that at least goes back to the ancient Greeks, who invented a character named Prometheus, who played with fire and saw the things that went wrong with that fire. Right? Prometheus, ultimately, for folks who are not familiar with the mythology, ends up creating fire. It goes very badly for him. And Prometheus' story is attached, folks may not know this, to the subsequent mythology of Pandora, who comes with a box of wonders that she's not allowed to open, decides to open them anyway, and lets out all of the evils into the world through the curiosity of seeing what would happen if I just unlocked this dimension of human potentiality or this kind of structure. So the Prometheus story and the Pandora story are sometimes mostly talked about actually in two different domains. It's the same story. It's the same story told in two different directions. And the endpoint for Prometheus is that Prometheus himself is punished. The subsequent story of Pandora is that everybody else is punished for this too. And that is typically what ends up happening. We get a little bit of both.
We've covered a lot of ground today, so thank you for that. We usually hit a bunch of quick, rapid fire questions, but I always have to ask the guest if you're up for it, because I want to kind of run through these, but you can't think long about them. I need quick responses. You up for it?
Okay, but I will tell you that is a perilous thing to ask a professor of English literature for a quick soundbite. So as long as you're up for it,
we'll give it a shot. We'll give it a shot. So the first one's going to be more about projecting the future, which is even more difficult, but 5 years out from now, are we better or are we worse at asking what technology is for?
It depends on who we empower to do the asking.
Okay, that's fair. Do you want to go past that? Go further?
Yeah, I think that I can foresee two different environments. And one is an environment where we continue down the path we're on right now. And the other is that something intervenes. And I'm an optimist. So I always think that there is a possibility of something new emerging. And I wouldn't believe it if I weren't also trying to make it happen.
That's fair. I'll use the term responsible AI broadly. Responsible AI as a job title in 10 years, are there more of them or is that completely gone?
I hope that in 10 years, we just call them technologists and it is one and the same. But if I had to bet on it, and if I had to put my research down and looking at trends, there's more of them. That doesn't necessarily mean you're doing better things with technology or safer things. It just simply means that the ethical questions and the policy questions have disappeared or been absorbed into technical fixes.
That makes sense. What like looking at today, what do you think is the bigger risk? Is it the technology itself or the institutions that are failing to govern it?
I will give you a very quick story that allows me to answer both. I was invited to give a talk at the London School of Economics about a month ago, where my talk was on what happens when governments procure socio-technical systems and what happens when those systems that they procure go wrong. And on my way over to London to give that talk, a socio-technical system embedded in the government's visa system went down for 2 days, and I wasn't able to travel to London to give that very talk. So I became my own case study. Bad travel is bad travel, lost money, lost time. But what happens when that's an organ transplant system? Or what happens when it's a system for people to find shelter at fleeing a domestic abuse or family finding food stamps? So I would say it's both. The social structures around evaporate, and that is a problem when we take the people who know how to do things and we remove them from that system because we depend on a socio-technical system. And the socio-technical system could also go wrong.
We often talk about some of the loudest voices in technology or the loudest voices in AI, the Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg. We've mentioned several on this show today. Keeping some of them in mind or others that we might think of as being the loudest voices currently, what do you think they are flat wrong about right now?
I think that they are flat wrong about the idea that our technologies will save us. That has been the missed promise since Prometheus. And since then, the idea that technologies will deliver us from our human failings has consistently gone wrong. Technologies can fix wonderful things, and I hope that they continue to do that. But the human problems are human problems. They will never be solved by technological products.
So we call this show Disruptor Confessions. So I'm going to ask you, Dr. Donig, do you have a confession? Do you have something that you can share with us? Something that you maybe catch yourself doing, or something that executives need to hear that you haven't said out loud, or something in your academia, something that you would share with us that others maybe not aware of?
Well, I guess I would confess that as a critic of technological products and particularly I find myself extraordinarily aided by a product like Claude. And I say that as a confession, but I openly confess it in almost every single talk I give. And I almost always say that whatever talk I'm giving has been aided by Claude. And I point Claude out specifically because I use Claude, and I use Claude over ChatGPT or other products out there, mainly because it's better. And the reason that it's better, I think, is because they take policy and thoughtful approaches really seriously. And to go back to your earlier point, John, or your earlier question, you could do both. You can be the best product, and you can also take thoughtful approaches to safety and what it means to be a human being seriously, which Anthropic does. And those two things can align. And I think that, I don't use Claude because I think it's morally better. I use it because it is just a better product. And it is a better product because it takes these things seriously. So I confess to using generative AI. And I also confess that in doing so, I think that I can still be consistent with the values that I care about.
I really respect that. I found myself moving more into Claude over the last year, still float around, but mostly Claude, for very similar reasons. I see the way they approach their constitutional AI, and I value that. So I reflect what you just said. So thank you for that. We also
Yeah.
frame the show not just around confession, but disruption. And sometimes we'll think about disruption as what disruption maybe erases, and also what it creates. So thinking about your book, your work, your observations, your teachings, what gets erased that we will only realize we miss once it's gone if we proceed down the path we're going?
I think that we will miss the knowledge that something we have created is fundamentally human. I love, it's no surprise, literature. And the other day I was rereading a book by the author Pat Conroy, one of the first books I read as a young adult. My dad loved Pat Conroy. I love Pat Conroy. Reading Pat Conroy, the sentences, which were so beautiful, they're just like, he writes about Carolinas, and you can just hear the waves rolling through, this crashing on the beach in sentences. And I read it and I thought, that is 100% human. That experience is 100% human. And every single word that I am reading is 100% human generated. And I said, I guess after 2023, I'll never be sure of that again. I'll never be sure that a song that I love is really human. I'll never be sure that the words that I love are 100% human. I'll never be sure that a photograph that I find remarkable, that amazing, is truly representative of the world as perceived by humans and as it really is. And I think we'll miss that guarantee, or at least the reasonable belief in authenticity and in our human creativity.
Wonderful. When the next generation asks you, what did you do while these machines, this technology was being built? What do you want that honest answer to be? What do you want them to think?
I never think of myself as a disruptor. I tend to really be wary of revolutions. Historically, my family's lived through several of them in different continents, and they're not fun to live through as much fun as they are to read about them. I try and think of myself as somebody who is mowing my own blades of grass. I'm having conversations with people. I'm changing minds one by one. I'm writing things that I think to be true in order to change how people think about things. And I invest in that kind of slow growth. Without, I think, the ambition of changing the world as much as it is ensuring that the places where I live and I grow and where I can be effective and helpful, I live and grow and am effective and helpful.
I think you're very reflective and observational, and I think because of your words matter is how I describe you. I think you're so interesting. Your focus on language and storytelling, and you're bringing it into AI and ethics. So I think this is a beautiful intersection of human and tech. Um, I know you've written this Technological Grotesque. You have this podcast, Technically Human. Your work now at UC Berkeley. If people want to follow you, learn more about you, where can they best learn about you?
Yeah, Technical Human is where I have some of my favorite conversations with some of the people who I think are doing really exciting stuff, or people who challenge me on what I think, or people who I want to challenge on my show. I try and not just talk to people who agree with, try and get people on there too who I disagree with, so we can have those kinds of productive conversations. It's a really important value for me. So check out Technically Human. If you're at Berkeley, come find me in a course. And what I want people to really come away with in this conversation, if you take nothing else away from this conversation, is that no one has ever gotten to where they are without other people helping them. I am where I am because other people gave me of their time, of their resources, and helped me to get where I am. So if you're listening to this show and I can be helpful to you, please reach out to me. I'm very easy to find on the internet. Shoot me an email if you want 10, 15 minutes of my time to run an idea through by me. If I can help you get to the next place that you want to go by the people I know or by the thoughts that I can share with you, reflections I have, come find me. I will take the 10, 15 minutes to talk to anybody if I can be helpful. And I want to make sure that people know that if they can be helpful, then it's worth 10, 15 minutes of their time to give to someone else. All of us are only here because somebody gave that 10 to 15 minutes. And I want to be able to give that time to anybody who is trying to do thoughtful, good work in the world.
I don't know another way to end this show. What a beautiful way to end. It's really living out, I think, how you describe yourself. Your ethical path is to do things that do good, and you're just offering your time. So thank you for that. Dr. Deb Donig, thank you so much for the time today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, John. I really love the show, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to talk to and engage with your listeners. It's not nothing that your listeners are giving up, an hour of their time to listen to a conversation. So I really appreciate your listeners, and I really appreciate all of the preparation and work that you do to make these conversations available to folks.
Well, fantastic. Those of you who are watching or listening, as always, as Deb just said, thanks for joining us on Disruptor Confessions. We also encourage you to subscribe. You can follow us on Substack. And as I always like to say, until next time, just stay curious. Thanks again, Deb.